Hello, good morning, everyone. First of all, it's a Saturday while people are making other plans. You have leaned towards self-learning. It surely gives us motivation to do more. First of all, congratulate yourself for the time you've taken for self-learning and the enthusiasm shown. Thanks for taking time. Before we start the session today, we wanted to talk a little bit about Technowise and what we do and who we are, what we're made of, and things like that, right? I'm sure most of the folks here know about it, but we would definitely quickly tell you about what we do and who we are. Technowise, we are a boutique technology consulting firm. We do custom-based software solutioning for the clients. The solution which we ship are robust, scalable, and easily maintainable, and that's why we are a preferred consulting organization. The reason why we are preferred is also because of the reason how we do is also because the engineering practices which we follow, all right? The best of tools available in the market, and that's why we are a boutique technology consulting firm. How do we work? We work like tech partner to our clients. We understand the client's problem in depth and impart solutions that are adding business value. Agile is surely not a buzzword here. We ensure we take pragmatic approach while solutioning. That's about Technowise and what we do as a business and what we are made of. Technowise is made of people. People are our power. People who are passionate, curious, and always enthusiastic about learning and sharing knowledge. And we believe that sharing knowledge is our strength. In this, we also learn a lot of things as well. Another thing is, while people are definitely our power, and then while technology is at core, we also believe that we are strongly driven by values. Okay, so we call it ABCs of Technowise. Which is always do the right thing, all for one and one for all, be humble and kind, that talks about respect and empathy, be responsible and accountable, that talks about ownership, commitment to being open, that talks about transparency, create a difference, that's for thought leadership. Again, as I told you, that's what we call it as ABC of Technowise. Why Technowise, and what is knowledge sharing, which we are talking about? As mentioned earlier, we are enthusiastic about sharing knowledge, and in this process, we also experience the joy of learning. And Technowise, there are two types of learning sessions which we do. One is a Technowise, which is more external facing, like we do, like what we are doing now. And in this, what we share about is the things which we find, findings or learnings, which can be helpful for other, fellow software, other people in the software industry, which they can apply in their day-to-day life. And also, there is another session called Yoda, which is more internal. That is also helpful for us to, understand what's happening in the other project. How are people solving? How are Technowise solving, problems in other projects? So that's pretty much about Technowise and Technowise. And I would definitely want, I wanted to pass it on to my colleagues, Prathamesh and Soham, who are going to be talking about Scalable CSS today. We are also a big fan of, feedback. We wanted to get feedback after the session, so we would want you to give us feedback so that it will help us to improve, to better our Technowise and also help deliver better, sessions like this. I will leave the feedback link on this chat in between. My colleagues will also help you share the feedback links in between. So yeah, enjoy the session and thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you, Soham and Prathamesh.
Hey, hi guys. Welcome everyone. We are here to talk about Scalable CSS. I just want to keep this up front that we want to keep this whole session interactive session. We will be asking a lot of questions. I hope that you guys are ready to answer them and share your experiences. That will help us move ahead with the session, with the knowledge of understanding of you guys, what you guys have done, and it becomes easy for us to navigate accordingly as well. Yeah. So starting with this, we'll first tell you what we are going to cover here. First is problems with CSS to make it scalable. We'll discuss some of the problems that CSS has, or we end up them as a problems, which will make us difficult to make them scalable. The second thing would be identifying the CSS code smells, how to identify them, how to fix them. We'll go through all of them. It would be an highly interactive session, because we'll let you code as well, side by side, wherever we are doing it. And the third one is the CSS methodologies and architecture alternatives. We'll try to cover most of the methodologies that we have widely using in the front end community. We'll go into depth in each of them, and we'll also provide the pros and cons, and we'll try to make this interactive as well. Okay, so this is what we are going to cover. Do you guys have any questions until now? And this will be my thumb rule, that if there is no questions or there is no reply, we'll be moving ahead. Cool. So the first question is, what do we mean by scalable CSS? What do you guys think? What do we mean by scalable CSS here? Why do we need a scalable CSS? Anyone? You could also
like most programming languages, it is not, we cannot say that we can follow OOCSS here, but we can make it modular and clean, so that any future enhancement requires least amount of existing code changes, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, so basically it should be extendable for the huge website, maybe. Example, like Facebook, which has multiple components, Twitter and Instagram, which has multiple UI components which are consistent throughout the app. That would be a huge website or a product that we would want to support our CSS for, right? And here we mean that writing CSS for such kind of products and making them scalable. By scalable, we mean that it should be easier for changes. It should be easier for identifying problems and debugging, etc. Cool. Let's move on. Now, I would like to understand what you guys think that the problems are in achieving the scalability that we need here. Assuming that we are building example of Facebook or a Twitter, what would be our problems? Or not even such a big product, even maybe a medium scale product. But I think the problems here will be same. So what do you guys think that the problems will be there? just pertaining to CSS here.
Maybe something related to the changes that will be coming up that we are not aware of, the changes in the UI design and all that.
Right. Change management. Yeah, that's a bigger problem. Debugging could be a problem. Like which component is failing, we don't know it yet. A page is failing, but we don't know what changes were made that this single page is failing, right? That can be an issue as well. Anything else?
Achieving consistency. Dead code.
Yeah, dead code. Absolutely right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Achieving consistency.
Overriding.
What do you mean by overriding?
Like another CSS may be overriding some of our classes. Yeah, it's like debugging.
Making it
Yeah.
difficult to debug, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, correct. Right. So these would be the problems, right? Unruly CSS is difficult to maintain. Again, the maintainability is an issue. Difficult to rapidly iterate on a design, like we discussed. If there is any change, it's how difficult is it to adapt to those changes, because the UI is always ever growing and ever improving. Difficulty in identifying redundant code, dead code, can be on the similar lines. And changing a property affects other part of the screen, so this also can be an issue. So what are we going to do here is, these are some of the examples of the results of the code smells that we believe that creep in the CSS. And we are going to focus on mostly on the code smells here in this next section. And this code smells section would be like, we'll have a simple layout designed by Soham here already, and we will share the code with you. We think that it has multiple code smells, so it would be easier if you guys identify them, because we are going to give you a small problem statement as well to make a small change in that CSS, and see how difficult it was or how easy it was. And maybe while doing that, identify some of the code smells, and maybe we can discuss on them, right? Cool. We'll pass on this to Soham.
Now what we are doing is we'll share you link of the code in chat. What we want you to do is go through the code and try to identify smells, and in the README, we have added few changes to this layout. We want you to try to change, implement those changes, and then we can discuss how easy it was, how difficult it was for us to change, and we can also discuss about why it was difficult for us to implement these changes. So we will, yeah. So you can get started. We'll start a timer of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And after 5 minutes, we could start discussing. In between as well, if you have any doubts or if you have any questions, you feel free to ask. Yeah.
Cool. So whoever was able to do it, can you guys tell me what, if it was difficult or if it was easy, and if it was difficult, why it was difficult?
And along with that, if you found, apart from changes, if you found anything in the CSS that was not written well or which might have scalability issues, you could talk about that as well.
Yes or no?
So when I tried, so layout change was easy.
Yes or no, you can.
Am I audible?
Talk. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay. So when I tried to change the layout, it was easy. It was I just changed info and title classes float to left and right, switched that. So that was easy. But when I increased the font size of paragraph, then the paragraph, that is second paragraph, floated to the right side because the width was not adjusted properly. So in that case, what I had to do was give 60% width to paragraph thing and adjust 40% width to title and subtitle. So that's how I was able to manage it. But if I did not adjust the width, I was not able to do it.
Right. Yeah. This would be like the first problem that we discussed, like easy to maintain the change or easy to do the change.
And And both of these changes were actually unrelated. We just wanted to increase the font size, but while increasing the font size, we also had to adjust the layout. So if there was in the next iteration, if we had a requirement of moving the second paragraph to the left side or creating a zigzag like layout, then it would even add more complexity to this.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, even I did somewhat similar to what Arnav did, but I didn't notice that the paragraph went on the right side. I only noticed after Arnav told that. And also for changing the font size of all the paragraphs that we have, the first CSS that we had applied for paragraph, I had to apply the exclamation important to have it applied for all the paragraphs on the page. So in short, overriding the CSS that we have written for a particular paragraph.
Right. Yeah. Correct. So anything that you now these are the problems that you faced right now, anything specific that you would say that doing this caused to this problem, basically anything like that in the code, in the CSS?
If something that was not done the way it was, then then this problem wouldn't have come.
Yeah.
So was giving floats to directly say the title H4 tag and P tag a right way of doing it, or a right way of arranging content on the screen? What do you have to think of? What is your opinion on that? So should we add floats directly to the content?
Probably we could have had a common wrapper for a particular section. Like currently we are having paragraph and the title tag separately. Instead of that, the contents which are on the left, we could have enclosed that within a div tag and then could have given some common CSS to that particular tag.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yes. And anything regarding font size was this a problem, giving font size directly to P a problem in any ways? Okay. Let's move on to the smells that we just discussed, and there are a few more smells. Important, not important statement that you used, Shreyas, that was also a problem. So we have documented few common smells which we should avoid every time. So one of that is having too long rules. So if we go back at our code and have a look at the title, so title has a lot of things in it. So it has a float, it has widths, color is fine. It also has margin, it also has font size. So scaling this in the sense, if you have a UI element or some content on the screen which looks similar to this, you would not be able to use this class as it is, because it has font size and font color is fine, but it also has width, it also has float, so which kills it reusability completely, and you will end up adding duplicate classes which are almost similar, but just because the way the design is, you are adding some layout related styles, some theme related styles in that class itself. But then again, you are duplicating the code and you are increasing your CSS size by doing that.
Yeah.
Another smell that we had in the code was overqualified selectors. So if you have a look at the sample here, the nav class is applied to a UL. So for this class to be effective, you need to have a UL element, and on that you need to put in the nav class, which is an overkill. You could simply achieve that by creating a nav class, and wherever you have a requirement where it looks like a nav, you could directly use the nav class without the requirement of having a UL class.
Yeah.
So if we go back to our CSS, the font size of the footer element has a book info class in front of it. So this is a needless specificity added to it. So this is, I mean, this is only so a paragraph inside a book info class will have 14 font size. So in case you have any paragraph or any content on the screen which has 14 font size, there's no way of you using this, because you need to add a book info class on the top of this, on top of the paragraph, which you need to have 14 pixel size. And book info will not make any sense in that case, because it has margin top 0, margin bottom 0, which makes no sense. So it again kills the reusability of that class.
Yeah.
There might be similar styles as well. So if you add a lot of styles, a lot of unwanted styles, and if you couple that with an element, you are adding unnecessary workload on the browser as well. Plus it inhibits the reusability completely.
Yeah. Before that, do you guys have any questions or any thoughts on these two smells that we just discussed?
Prathamesh, in what scenario we would prefer to have the prepend? In case if we wanted to apply CSS specific to that particular element and not to any other element, in that case this would be preferable, right?
Yeah, but again, here the tags are there, right? So UL. So I'm saying that my nav class will always have UL, and then only you can apply these styles. So which is again needlessly specific here, right? So if tomorrow we decide to change the layout of my nav bar, this CSS is useless for me then.
Okay.
So that's the point. So again, this can be a pragmatic approach when we want to be a little bit more specific, not too specific and not less specific. We can add these prepend. We can add prepend these elements, but not specifically these element types. I don't see there is any real value to add these kind of elements.
This will make your code rigid. So if that is desired, if you want to have a rule that if you want to make your code very rigid, if you want to make that selector very rigid, and you want to make that final, so if every time you have a UL with an app class, you want that to look the way you have defined, then that could be a use case, but that is
not generally the use case.
You're not keeping it open for extension. You're then closing that style there itself.
That might be the good time to ask yourself that do we really want this element as a prepension, right? And think about the reusability and everything else, of course.
But again, it is always possible to override this behavior, right?
Again, right. So exactly. So now the solution would be overriding that, right? Now overriding is again a code smell that we might discuss later on.
Okay.
Because the structure of CSS is not meant for overriding these so easily. Okay, you can override, but again, you will lose out. Whoever is reading this, the definition of ul.nav here will not have any idea that somewhere else this is being overridden.
Yes. And if you are overriding the whole class, the previous declaration might be a dead code. So the last
Yeah.
CSS that is getting written,
Yeah.
that is getting loaded in the browser will be always applied. And if your project is too big, you might end up affecting some other page without having a knowledge about it. So overriding is you can, but overriding is never the right solution.
Yeah.
We find ourselves doing that very regularly, but that is one thing that we should try to avoid every time.
Yeah. There is always a different option, I feel.
Dangerous selectors. So styling the elements directly, especially the layout elements like div span, who don't have any representation or presentation attributes. They are just there for laying your design. So you should never style them, because there are going to be n number of occurrences of those elements on your screen, and adding a style to it. You can, I mean, again, going back to the discussion, if you want to make your code rigid, or if you want to have that style always to be there, in that case you could, but that is never a case with basic native HTML elements.
Yeah. So maybe there can be a case where body में मैंने font size set किया हुआ, right? So maybe that can be the case, but div is a multi-used element, and that is why it would be a bad idea to do this.
Yes. You can surely style a button. You can surely have some basic style for a paragraph.
Yeah.
But never for div span or elements which are used for used in your layout
multiple times in a single page. Yeah.
Yes.
Before that, any questions on this?
Is it okay to narrow it down by specifying that the div with this particular ID or class, or if it is a parent or sibling of any particular other element? So in that case, it should be fine.
You're talking about this then.
No, the div one, as you said, it is too wide and it is too widely used over. So if we will use a div in only, and it will start impacting the whole website, just because we are using these elements as a generic, right? This is generic element. So in order to make it, if it is not possible entirely to use only class or ID, and we want to apply it on div only, so in that case we can use it in combination with some other specifiers, like being a parent or being child. In that case, is it okay, or is there any better way to do that in that case also?
So class name would be a best solution for this, I feel. That you have the class name, because the class name can be anything, and class name can be more onto your domain specific, or mainly onto your layout specific, or whatever that you are trying to style here. And then it becomes readable as well as easy to understand, right? You don't need div there then. So I've already added a class, then you don't need any div there. Or if you want to add a div, then div plus this class would be fine.
So you don't need to style the div. You use the class to style it. You directly style the div.
Again, combining this with div would be the
and CSS without HTML has no meaning. So you would be putting the class on the div. So if you want to style a particular section or a particular div in your project, you more often than not, you will be using a class to style it, not be directly styling a div.
Yeah.
Okay. Because
and the other options that you mentioned, ID and everything, I think that's again course mail. We'll discuss that in the future slides.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, I was just confused, because in production side also people have used the CSS directly on div or body, and such a wide generally used elements, which is too generic.
Correct. Maybe it makes sense for a single page website, or like 2-3 pages website, right? At that time you don't have to worry about a lot of things. But if you see in future that this website is going to add multiple pages, components, and everything, then you might think a little bit more on that. Yeah.
So the best part of CSS is it is very easy to get started.
Yeah.
That is the bad part itself. You can easily get started with something, but when the code increases, when the project increases, then you start seeing the problems of writing too broad selectors or having too specific selectors. Adding a new page or adding a new component becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Another code smell is using not important reactively. So what Shreyas just told us was he just to adjust the layout, he used the not important flag. So that was a reactive way. So he did not want to, but just to achieve the design, he used that flag. So a not important flag could be used, but then you have to use it proactively. Proactively in the sense, as we can see in the example, we want the error text to have the red color always.
Yeah.
In your site, you are fixing that style. So anywhere, if you are using error text, that should appear red. So that becomes your application rule or your design rule, which is final, and that will not change under any scenario. So if you have such requirement where you want to have a style to precede everything, then you can use a not important flag, and that style will always be applied.
Yeah. Any thoughts on important? It solves many of our problems easily, actually. But yeah, it's more powerful a tool to use everywhere.
Any examples that you guys can think of where you have used not important flag?
Yeah.
Or why did you have to use it?
Yeah.
Basically, Sushant this side.
Yep.
So basically important when we use the important, it's override the existing style, okay, and it's not a good practice. Means
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Sushant. Having important, it means that we are overriding which is existing style, and again, it will create side effects that we might not know of.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, if you have this important style somewhere in the middle of your CSS imports, that will affect everything after that and even before that. And to solve that, what I have found myself doing is either add specificity or just add an ID to that element to just override that, which keeps on adding a pile of smells every time you are trying to override it or change the design, which includes that class. The next smell is using IDs as a selector. So IDs are never to be used as selector. IDs precedes everything. So if you are using ID to style, it will precede all the styles that are that are there on that element. So if you have suppose two classes applied and you have ID on that element and that ID has some style, so only that class, only those properties would be applied first, and then the other properties would get applied. IDs appear on the page only once. So you have a class for only one occurrence on the screen.
Yeah.
And if you have put that ID on the div, then it is a bigger problem, because there are a lot of divs on your screen, and then you are styling only one div on the screen, and you have a class for that. So that anyways, that is not going to be duplicated or repeated on the screen. So there is no scope of reuse because there's only one occurrence of it.
Yeah. Right. Any thoughts on this? I'm sure we have all been using IDs at some point to style our CSS.
Any scenarios that you can think of where you have seen IDs getting used to style? And if
any problems? Yes, Ravi.
Yeah, Ravikant here. So basically, as you mentioned, when we write not important, the same I also used to do if I want to apply specific set of CSS to the existing, especially when we are handling the multiple viewports. So some of the time it's not going to be applied the specific. So
Correct.
by providing that ID, and then we used to write this not important things or specific related to that. So we are some able to store particular viewport or related to the different devices. So yeah, definitely not important. We don't have to use, but IDs also that you have mentioned, because it's over means it's having the high precedence as compared to the other one. So in this scenario, what will be the best practice to apply the CSS?
Right. So ID, so you, if you're styling ID, you're only styling that one occurrence on the screen. So if you, so one way would be you could either use inline style. I mean, this is a very bold statement to make, but you can use inline style, because if you want only one element to be styled, then
Or a unique class.
or a unique class, a
Yeah.
class that is a class is always a better choice.
Yeah.
I mean, a class, normal class selector, instead of using an ID selector,
Yeah.
you could use a simple class selector and style that element. If it is only going to have one and only one occurrence, then putting an inline style is also not a bad practice.
Yeah. I mean, considering the styles that we are going to apply,
Yes, yes.
if they're like 2 to 3, more than 2, I think that would be a bad idea. But yeah, you can always have class.
Because in our few
Sorry, my voice
of
is
the
breaking, Ravi.
pages, we have the inline CSS also. Again, in few of pages, we do see inline CSS, but it used to, like, we have to pass the content security policy. Time we just got failed as per the security reasons. And they are saying like you have applied the inline CSS. So that is also not, I mean, bad practices as per the scanning softwares are available. So they have provided those, such statements. So we are again make those inline CSS to the class version, and we have applied it.
Yeah.
To that.
Right.
Again, you have to, so what I would say is you have to go back and have a look at the style that is getting applied. Have a look at the style with the view of the overall design of the page, and try to see if there is anything that could be reused, or if you can have multiple smaller classes which are applying those styles. You could compose those classes together, and you can have multiple classes on that element itself, instead of creating an ID and styling that.
Yeah.
And one more thing that you could do is, if the element looks similar to some different component of your page, you could have a word with your designer to either make them look like the components that are getting used widely in your application, or I would ask the designer to revamp the design, because you cannot just have one component which is unique throughout the app, because it will anyways not look in line with the design, and it is similar reason it would not be scalable in that sense, because it is only one component used at only one place. It could be an exception, but if that is an exception, that could be a separate module which you can create using a class selector, instead of using an ID there.
Yeah. Cool. Let's move. Yeah.
The next smell is magic numbers. So magic number is something that you use a number just to achieve a design itself. Maybe you add padding 12 pixel, margin 21 pixel, or 25, 27 pixel just to center a div, or you are giving line height as the example here, you're giving line height of 20 pixel and font size of 16. So in case you change the font size, you also have to adjust the line height here. So it is not a normal way of using any number. It does not, if number that you're using to adjust your padding, margin, or even position, which is not matching with your other CSS. And if you find the occurrences of that number to be only once or twice in your whole project or in your CSS, then that could be labeled as a magic number, which you have just used to adjust something on your screen. So you should avoid using magic numbers. One of the cause of need of using magic number is incorrect layouts. So going back to the example of floats and 60% widths that Arnav had to use to fit the paragraph in a proper location. So that is a magic number. So it had no relation with the font size, but again, he had to use it to correct the design to make it look like the way it should be. Any experiences that you guys want to share where you have used a magic number, or you have just put in a random number to fit things on the screen?
Yeah.
Hi Soham, Roshan this side.
Hello.
Yeah, actually, this type of magic number we might need to use while adjusting the badges over the notification thing. So can that be, or do you suggest some better approach?
So while setting it on, so I got the use case. So first you can start with thinking about the layout, how it looks like, and then try to solve it by using simple layout. I mean, if there are any ways to not use, so using that number, so using position and then adjusting the number would not be a magic. I mean, we cannot call that a magic number, but you need that basically. So if that number is fitting in the geometry of the design, so if you have an icon and you have to place it on the right top of the icon, which just overlaps the icon, then and it is following certain dimension rules. So if your position top or left or right is, say, maybe 2 pixel, 4 pixel, which is in line with your overall points, overall units that are getting used in the application. Or by overall units, I mean you have basic. So you would have your basic font unit, which is either 14 pixel or 16 pixel. And if those numbers are scaling or moving up and down in those units, then that is fine. But if you are, if you are doing margin top, so top 3 pixel or top 7 pixel, top 8 pixel, just for the sake of adjusting it, then you should avoid it. So you should go back and have a look at the layout, layout of your div, layout of the icon, in which that layout of the box or layout of the div in which your icon is sitting, and then try to work from there to match those dimensions, match those units that are defined in the design, rather than opening the developer tool and then adjusting it. You should always try to have a look at the design and the units that are used in the design.
And make the layout work for you.
And make the layout work for you.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
using position and adjusting the element is not a magic number. It is following those units. I mean, it is not any random unit like 1.2, 1.3.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else? Any questions? Let's move ahead.
So two specific selectors, this is another smell where you have a long selector tree and then you are trying to style an H3, which is inside a board class, which is inside a span, which is inside a div, which is inside a body. So this is adding a lot of rules to style an H3. And again, there is no reusability. I mean, this is only once. So you might as well use ID here, which you should not, but then this is too big a selector. Instead, you could just have a utility class saying color red and put that on that, maybe H3. So
plus the problem is that he's expecting that H3 should be inside, will have board, and this board will be inside a div, of course, always. And this is strictly following the structure of the DOM. Which can never be the case, right? Tomorrow we'll change we'll move around this component somewhere else.
Yeah.
But if that changes the CSS or removes the style, then that could be again like unwanted side effect that we have.
Yes. And again, I mean, you are making your HTML too rigid.
Yeah.
And if that rigid HTML or that specific HTML pattern makes sense to you, then you can go ahead and have these styles. But only if this structure is repeating in your project. If you have 10 occurrences of such selectors or more than 3, it makes sense to have this kind of long selector or this kind of a specific selector. But if it is getting used only once, you should not. You could just create a utility class which gives a red color, or you could create a class only for that use case and apply that class on that element.
Yeah, some of the cases that I can think of where it would make sense is maybe you have a specific component, a bigger component that you have, like there is a like if I consider a feed of Facebook where it has like button, maybe when I write the CSS for a post, I would say that I want the like button inside the post have this specific style. Maybe that can be a use case because my like button will always be inside that post component and not anywhere outside, right? So I'm basically limiting its scope here. So specificity is useful, of course it is useful, but in the context of where you are going to use it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Anyone who has used a long selector and why they have used it and what were the problems or benefits of doing that? Surely we do this while overriding. If you are using a library and we want to override something, we definitely do something like this.
Yeah.
Anyone who has done this and
any other use cases that you think of? Anyone? Okay.
Roshan again here. So while using the CSS preprocessors like SASS or SCSS, then means how many depths do you recommend to go inside it? Because in turn that will result into this long type of selectors only, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think even in the nested classes, I'm sure you are referring to the nested classes approach, right?
Yeah.
So even the preprocessors like SAS have given the rule of thumb that more than 3 nested classes would be like to reconsider of, So I think that is again a thing here that we see common, where even if you are using these classes in such way, or even the nested structure, follow less and less nested behavior in that.
Ideally 0. If you want to be very strict with yourself, 0 nesting, if possible. And you could always have a new, you could always have a new class for that. If even though it occurs inside a specific HTML pattern, there's no need for it to nest. You can have simply you can have a different class for it and apply that class there. Because nesting would add specificity, and in case you want to override it later, you will not be able to. So overriding in the sense, you could just remove that class and add a new class. If there is no nesting. If you do nesting, then you will have to create an even more specific class so that it has some effect there. Otherwise, the previous class, which has more specificity because of the nesting, will get applied. So ideally, you should not have any nesting, but even if you have to do, try to limit it to as less number as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Anything else from anyone on this? Okay, can move on. With this, we are done with few of the code smells that we had documented and we discussed. Anything else that anyone wants to add? Any other smell that they have encountered, or anything that they want to discuss more on what we discussed till now?
Or any other code smell that you can think of that you think that's a major code smell that we missed? No. Cool.
Now, in the coming section, what we are going to discuss is about different methodologies that you can adopt to overcome all these smells. So whatever we talked about were because of bad practices that we follow, and practices that we follow just to achieve a design without even thinking about CSS structure or how it might affect the entire project. Now we'll discuss about different methodologies following which you can avoid most of the code smells.
Yeah.
First of it is OOCSS. This stands for Object-Oriented CSS. This tries to apply certain object-oriented principles like abstracting common behavior and not repeating the code, having separation of concerns, and tries to apply that in CSS.
Yes. Has anyone used it before?
Or has read about it?
Has read about it? Has anyone tried it? No? Okay, cool.
So object-oriented principles. Object-oriented principles, one of the main thing that it says is you identify common repeating HTML patterns in your application and abstract them out and create classes for those repeating HTML patterns so that you end up with less CSS. So in day-to-day CSS work or in general projects, what we tend to do is we keep on adding new CSS for every page that comes in our way and add on to the CSS that already exists. We might use specificity there or not important flag there to override existing styles, but that is a bad practice which we just saw in the previous section. What OOCSS recommends is you identify those patterns, abstract them out, and create classes for that pattern and keep reusing those patterns in your application so that you have a predictable code, less CSS, and always less code is more maintainable than having a lot of CSS. Plus it solves the problem of unexpected behavior, like changing one class affects something else on the screen. It has less CSS, so because you are reusing a lot of the code, you end up with less
becomes easy
CSS.
to change as well.
Become easy to change as well.
Yeah.
There are two major principles in this, which OOCSS recommends to follow. So one is separation of structure and skin. So by structure, we mean how, so structure is what makes the element look like the way it is. So if you take the example of a button and think about the structure of the button. So a button is rectangle in shape, has some padding, has rounded borders, and has text in the middle. So that becomes the structure, and the skin is the color of the button. So a primary button appears blue, an error button appears red, or warning yellow, and so on. So OOCSS recommends to have this separation of structure and skin. So you start with defining how the element will look. So you start with defining the invisible properties, which gives the element the structure, and then you create another class which gives that element the appearance that it has. The color, the font size are the appearance. So whatever you see on the screen, which we can actually see, is the appearance part, and the part that is hidden behind what you can see, which is the structure of the screen, structure of the element will be part of the structure. And anything here, is this part clear? Separation of structure and skin, or has anyone been following this practice of separating structure and skin in any ways? The other, sorry, yes.
Yeah, so the Bootstrap 5 which we use, it generally follows the same thing. Like for button, it uses the BTN class and then primary for giving the styling. So am I on the right track?
Yes. So Bootstrap is one of the library which follows OOCSS, which has a separation of structure and skin. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is right. Yes, you're right. Yeah. And another principle is separation of container and content. So in the example that we previously saw, the content was the text that was appearing on the screen, and the container was the invisible part, the layout that was holding that content. So OOCSS recommends us to have a separation between the container and the content. Container is responsible for the layout of the screen, and container just sits inside the content just sits inside the container. So container is responsible for creating those slots for the container to sit in, and the container and the content would just sit inside those slots. A simple analogy would be of a building where in the very beginning you create pillars, floors, and then after all of these things are created, you create your rooms and you do the interior designing. So the container would be the external skeleton of the building. So you can carry that analogy on your to your web pages. So how the elements or the content on the screen is to be structured is decided by the container. And then the contents or the modules or the components would just go and sit inside those container slots. So basically a container creates a wrapper around the contents and the components of your screen. Anything anyone wants to share on this, or any questions on this? No. So what we want you to do now is similar to what we did with bad code. We have created an example of OOCSS, and we have given some modifications that we want you to do, and then we can have a discussion about it. I'll share the code in chat, and similar to what we did for code smells. In chat. Just a second. Yeah.
Okay, so we are sharing the link here.
Yeah. So open that link, go through the code, and try to make the changes that are mentioned in README. So the first one is same. So you have to move the content, which is on the right to the left, left on the right. And there are some common patterns that are there in the HTML file, which are not refactored, I mean, the way it should have been. So try to identify them and create a common class. So let's
give 2 minutes.
2 to 3 minutes for
2 to 3 minutes for this. Well, I think we can start.
Yes, has anyone been able to solve it? And can they talk about their experience compared to the previous code, which had a lot of smells?
I was able to do the first one.
Mhm.
So what I did was we had we have a common div tag that was the content container. So it in the CSS we had the display property as flex. So I just set the display the flex direction as row reverse. So the title came on the right side and paragraph on the left side. And it was easier as compared to the previous one where we had to change the CSS at multiple places. Like we had to change the float right and float left as well as adjust the width of the paragraph. So it was comparatively easier.
Yeah.
Yes.
And why do you think it was easier?
Yeah, because we had it. We had a common container for both of the things that are there in that one particular section. And then applying a common CSS to the entire thing was made it easier. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
So that was a separation of content and the container part.
Yeah.
So going back in the HTML. So this is the container, and this container has created a layout. So this has so the CSS is actually responsible for the layout, and this is the common container, which is wrapping another 2 containers, and this container is again responsible for style for the layout of the content that is inside it. So a container is responsible for the layout of itself and the children as well. So the children of this container is the title and the info container again, and these the sub containers are then responsible for laying out the content that is inside it. So
yeah,
title and subtitle and these p tags and the user module that we see is actually not responsible for placing themselves on the screen, but the containers that we have are responsible for creating slots for them, and inside which we have just placed those elements or modules or even components, if you want to call them, and that makes it easy to move them around. So one way that you talked about, Shreyas, was to change the CSS to just change the flex direction. Another way would be you just copy paste this. You cut this from here and place it after that. So this will also work.
Come on.
Okay, sorry, I'm not used to the keyboard.
Copy kara this one. Select kara, copy kara this.
Okay. And placing it after this will also work.
Yeah.
It will just change the direction. So again, the responsibility of laying those elements is taken care by the wrapper, and you could just simply move around the elements wherever you want in the slots that are getting created by from the container.
Yeah.
And how about the second problem?
Yeah. Any observations on the patterns or refactoring that is needed?
Can you find any repeating HTML structure that you can see maybe in the footer? So in the footer as well, we have separation of container and the content. So this is the content that we have, and we have followed a similar pattern here. So we have created a footer, which is responsible for giving the horizontal layout we have given flex, display flex, which is laying the elements horizontally, and then we have created two footers. So we have one footer section on the left and one on the right. So we have created two container classes again for that, which are creating those wrappers or slots for the footer items to be placed. So one repeating pattern that you can see here is even display wise, if you notice, we have all the items are following a same pattern, wherein the first row is in italics and you have other two rows which are in normal fonts. Even here it is the same pattern is followed, and even for the last row same pattern is followed. But in the code, what I've done is based on the data that is getting displayed, I've created the classes like about label, about value, about date. And because this is an editor's list, I have created a list class. So there is some coupling between the data that is getting rendered with the CSS that I'm writing. But one thing to notice and understand is CSS and HTML are there for presenting the data, and they do not have direct relationship with the domain or the kind of data that is getting displayed.
Yeah.
So here what you have to do is just try and identify presentation patterns. So visually all of these three rows are looking the same. So instead of having separate classes for it, you could just abstract this pattern into and abstract classes for this pattern and then reuse those classes. So if you can directly use this here as well. If you change this to list and list label, list value, list date, there will not be any change.
Yeah,
because it is the same. So this instantly reduces your class, and
correct.
you can go back and delete that class. You just have one class which is handling the footer items, which eventually look the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions on this?
Yeah, that is the same for a title container as well as info container as well, right?
Yes. If they are repeating and if they're the same, you can create a common class for it and reuse it.
Yeah.
So this approach of OOCSS is semantic in nature. By semantic, I mean it looks for repeating HTML patterns. Maybe a list looks like a list, which it has a semantic value, and it is naming it based on the component. So card is an example of a semantic component. List is an example. So we are looking for repeating HTML patterns and creating classes for it, and then reusing the HTML pattern. So we use the same, we use the thing as a whole. We use the HTML and CSS together to come up with a layout, come up with a design that we want. Going back to a question which Saroj had asked, can we style elements directly? Can we style a div directly? In this case, you can, but you are locking the HTML structure. So if you can just give a class name at the top, and you can then style the first div, the second div, and the third div inside the list component, which is also not a bad way. But again, you're using specificity and you're adding certain specificity, and you might have some broad classes, but you can do that. If you have a common repeating pattern and you want to make that pattern repeatable and rigid, you can go ahead and style the divs which are inside the list class as well. So
yeah,
it could be acceptable in this scenario. Anything else anyone wants to share on this, or any questions? Let's move ahead. So another methodology that is widely used is BEM. It stands for block, element, and modifier. Has anyone used this or read about it?
Is it something related to naming the classes?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's start with this. So BEM stands for block, element, and modifier. So this carries the concepts that we just discussed about OOCSS, and on top of that, it gives us a new template to that. So a block stands for block encapsulates a standalone entity that is meaningful on its own. So the structure thing that we just saw in OOCSS, that is the block. So block is responsible for defining the structure of an element. So again, I mean, if taking the example of the card looks rectangle in shape. It has some width, it has some height, it has something in the body, something on the footer. So the structure is defined in the block. Element is a sub block. So element cannot exist without a block. Without a block, element has no meaning as such on its own. All the properties that we just talked about a block are applied on the element. It's just that the element cannot exist without the block. Element also defines the structure. It does not define the skin. It does not define how it looks like. It does not define the colors. It does not define font size and the other presentational properties that are there associated with any interaction element that are not part of the block and element both. Modifiers are responsible for giving the skin. So going back to OOCSS, we talked about structure and skin. So block and element are responsible for giving the structure, and modifiers are responsible for giving the skins.
How does it look?
How does it look like? Yes. Yeah. And modifiers are, I mean, you can, they are used to define different state of a component. So a button selected or button active, or if you are hovering on the button, that is another state. Or based on your application might have different states as well. So those defining how a component looks under different state comes under the modifiers.
Yeah, I think this pretty much solves the problem that we saw, that which uses multiple classes or multiple specificity.
Yes.
Right. So here my class name itself knows that this button is inside my card and it is success. So my behavior is given here. My element is there, and where it is coming from is also there. So the only one class solves this problem of having nested structure items.
Yes. And you don't need to nest it. And best practice is you should not nest it.
Yeah. Because the naming itself does it.
For you.
Yeah.
And one best practice to follow even in OOCSS and BEM is you don't give widths to the sub elements and the modifier classes. So giving the widths and giving dimensions padding should only be done in the container and the components,
which is block.
In the block, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other components which sits inside the block should not have widths on its own. So
correct.
Button success should not have width, it should only have color. So if you try to define widths, then there will be some mismatch, and then debugging also becomes a problem.
It can be 100%.
Yeah, you have to.
Not a specific.
Yeah, not a specific width. So the component which sits inside the wrapper or the container should use the whole space of the container.
Yeah.
So what we'll do now is
before that, any questions on this?
Yes.
Has anyone already used this before?
And BEM has a syntax. We forgot to talk about it. So this is the syntax that BEM recommends us to use. So the block has the name. I mean, the card is the block. And then the elements which are inside the card are named using __ image. So the image is a sub element of the card. So to represent that, we have double underscore and then the element name. And the modifiers are represented using double dash. So a card button is an element inside a card, and double dash success. So card button inside a card having success state. That is so this is a syntax that is getting followed while using them. So this is the block, this is the element, and this is the modifier.
Yeah. If you guys don't have any questions, we are going to follow the same thing that we did for OOCSS.
So I don't have question, but after watching this naming convention, I think that React Select, React Table, all those use this kind of this kind of naming convention, so they are using them, is what I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of popular libraries use this, and this is a widely used methodology. So if you are looking for a standard methodology to be used, if you are working on a project and you need something that is getting used widely and has defined rules and documented rules, you could surely use them.
And even works for bigger projects as well.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yes.
this can be an easy option.
Yep. So again, you guys can open the link and go through the code, and we have mentioned a couple of modifications in the README. We want you guys to try it out. Let's wait for 2 to 3 minutes more.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about the problem statement as well.
Yes.
It's asking to create a class to represent a visited state of the button.
Visited state has purple color. So we have a view more link in the project, and it has certain styles to it. So the first modification talks about changing the color of this. So you can assume that the current page that is getting rendered has a visited state on the button. So someone has already visited the button. You have the logic and all those things there. You have to create a class that represents that state and give purple color to it.
Yeah.
The second one is just to change the font size of the right section to 18 pixel.
We'll meet in 3 minutes.
Yeah. So were you guys able to do the modifications?
Sorry for making you guys code on Saturday. But yeah, this will help us also to understand.
I use the visited selector to apply the color purple for the first task. And you said one of the class names are not using BEM format, so it is in the footer section about label, I guess. Footer section left, the about label, about value, about date, so it is not in the BEM format, which says the block underscore underscore then the element name.
Okay. Yes. Again, this is a modifier and not an element. So it should have been represented with double dash because it is modifying the skin, because it is defining how it should look like and not the structure. Similarly, the button here, the button link is also defining the skin. So it is again a modifier. Cool.
Okay.
Also, should the class name of the button link should have had been user underscore view more dash dash button and then whatever visited or whatever it is.
Good question. So yeah, is button independent of the card? Can button exist outside a card?
Yeah.
So by that logic, I mean, you don't need to actually, just because it is nested, you don't need to put that as a sub element. If certain element or certain component has an existence on its own, then it should be a block. You don't need to, just because it is under certain component, you can have a number of nested blocks, that is fine. But if you think that block is going to get repeated, then it can have its own existence. But the block has no meaning outside. If certain element has no meaning outside that block, then it will be a sub element of it. And there you follow that syntax, right? Block underscore underscore element. But here button is not really an element of the block of the card or of the content that is under which it is getting displayed. So we can create button as a block instead of a element, which would be a sub block.
Okay, got it.
Any other observations?
There should be double hyphen, right? After user.
No. So this is just a name. This is not a modifier. So this is a class name. This double dash would make name as the modifier, which is representing some state. But yeah, I mean, okay, here, okay. Well, it should be like this because it is again transforming the appearance. Okay, correct. I thought you were talking about double dash here. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Any other things that you could spot in the code, or what was your experience using them compared to OOCSS?
Yeah.
You found it better, easier to look at the code, easier to maybe write CSS?
Yeah, it is easier to like navigate directly. Means when while debugging, then it is easier to navigate directly to the spot and then fix the problem.
Yeah.
Let's move ahead.
Yep. If there are any questions, we can move ahead.
Any questions? No. Okay. So the other methodology that could be used is SMACSS. I mean, it is pronounced as SMACSS, but it is SMACSS. It stands for Scalable and Modular CSS. Has anyone used it, read about it, or given it a try? Cool. Let's just go ahead and see what it is. So it is what we saw till now with OOCSS and BEM. It talks about how you should create components in specific, but SMACSS gives us a complete architecture of how you can think about your CSS code base as a whole. It does so by dividing your CSS into different categories: base, layout, modules, state, and themes. And then it expects us to look at each category separately and then optimize it based on our use cases. So let's have a look at the first category. So first are the base rules. So in the base rules, SMACSS recommends us to create our base styles. So it tells us to create default styles for all the elements that are going to be rendered on the screen. So all the presentational element along with the layout elements, we can define the base styles in the base rules. So it could be basically the color of your anchor tag that we have defined here. Commonly, we use reset CSS and normalize CSS in our project if we are not using any of the libraries. Every browser has certain default styles and which are different in different browsers. So normalize CSS and reset CSS are used to override those styles so that the elements look similar in all the screens. And again, I mean, having a base style which defines styles for all the HTML elements that are there that exist ensures consistency across the browser. So these selectors could be broad, but you don't override. I mean, you don't give specific styles. So you don't style your div with a background color. You just, for the layout components, what you do is you just override the user agent or the browser specific style so that they are consistent across the browsers. The next category are the layouts. Layouts are similar to what we saw in BEM and OOCSS. The separation of container and the content that we saw. The container was the layout. Only difference is it recommends us to add an L in front of it and nothing else. So it is very similar to it. It is the layouts that we talked about, but SMACSS just tells us to think about layouts as a separate category of CSS in your app and create the classes accordingly. So if you have a look at the page as a whole, SMACSS divides it into two categories: major components and minor components. So the major components are the layouts, header, primary nav, main nav, as you can see in the example. These are different sections of your page. So these make your major components on your screen, and then the minor components would sit inside those major components. So layouts are the major components of your screen, which are responsible for creating creating the basic layout of the screen. Then you have modules. Modules are card buttons that we saw and just saw in OOCSS and BEM. These modules would sit inside the layouts. So it is very, very, very similar to what we saw in OOCSS and BEM. And you have state rules, which we just saw in BEM.
Yeah, modifiers.
So SMACSS just gives us a separation, and it categorizes the CSS so that we can think about each component, each category individually, and then try to map it with our design. BEM and OOCSS is very specific to creating components, but SMACSS gives us a template in general while you're working on a project as a whole. This could be very helpful if you're starting off with a project which has with nothing in the project and you're starting from scratch. These categorization would give you some guideline for you to proceed ahead. And then you have themes in this. So themes based on if your project has themes, you can have theme rules. So theme rules is a separate category, and in the theme rules you just modify your theme. I mean, your card could have a separate border, your card could have a separate color or a font size. All those rules would fit in the theme rules category. So any questions here or any doubts, or has anyone used this kind of categorization before? I mean, without even knowledge of SMACSS, has someone categorized this CSS in this way, or any other categorization that they have done with their CSS code base? If not, we'll follow the same thing. We have a link for SMACSS as well. What we want you to do is have a look at the code base and try to make these changes. The changes here are not very important, but just have a look at the structuring.
Again. Look again. It was already there.
And let's have a discussion on this in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
How did you find this methodology, and compared to the previous ones, did you find any difference in this? And this is not actually, I mean, you could use OOCSS and BEM in SMACSS as well, but how did you find the overall structuring of our CSS as compared to what we did in BEM for the same design?
For the changes that we had to do, it was for me, it was quite similar to BEM. But overall, looking at the structure, the naming conventions that we followed for the layout and all, it looked cleaner and easier to understand.
Can you elaborate a little on that? What was easier to understand? I mean, which was not, I mean, easier compared to BEM or OOCSS.
OOCSS, yeah.
Yeah, basically just the convention related to .l-banner or .l-content. So that was self-explanatory that it is having some or the other layout inside this. If we compare it with the other one, if we just specify it as a card or the container, something like that, then in that we were not exactly aware whether this particular class is having some layout inside it, or it is just some CSS of a particular element that we are having.
Okay.
Yeah.
So explicit categorization of layouts and
Layouts. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Also, the first change that you had asked, am I missing something, or it was just a mistake? Because
No,
paragraph tag was already 18 pixels.
Actually, it was already 18.
Yeah.
Okay, I might have.
Okay. No worries.
I might have forgotten to revert it.
Okay.
So how easy was it to change paragraph here compared to the other two methods? Paragraph size. I mean, it was straightforward because you had paragraph in the base rules and which is getting used in your page, and you knew, and at least I knew where I should change, where I should make a change, because we have base rules and all the defaults would be part of the base rules. So the only change that I had to do is open the base rules file and change the font size, which is getting reflected throughout the screen.
Yeah.
Anyone has anything to share before we move to the next methodology?
No.
Good. Okay, let's move ahead. The next is Atomic CSS. Has anyone read about it, used it, using it? Good. Let's see how it is. So all the three methodologies that we saw till now were semantic in nature, which relied on identifying repeating HTML patterns and then creating classes for that repeating HTML pattern. Atomic CSS takes a completely different approach. It is a non-semantic, it is presentational approach where you define classes based on what they do. Every class has one responsibility and you define that in the class itself. So every class just has one property and you name the class based on the property that it has. So padding P4. So P4 will be giving padding 4.
Just padding 4.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So in this approach, this is a utility first approach, which creates a bunch of utility classes which has only one thing and one responsibility, and you style your elements by using those styles one after the other.
Yeah.
Any questions in this? So this is a completely different approach.
Yeah.
Till now we were thinking about identifying repeating patterns and then creating classes for those repeating patterns, then reusing the classes and the HTML structure together. Here you are only going to create classes with one responsibility, and based on your requirement, you just go ahead and use those styles to match the design that you have. So what I've done is I have an example of this as well. So I'll be sharing the link, and
I won't ask you to make any changes, right? Here.
I have.
Okay.
I have some modifications to be done. So any questions in this approach, because it does not rely on identifying patterns or thinking about repeating patterns or thinking about a block, a module or element, modifier, nothing. So this approach tells us to create classes with only one thing in it and use it wherever wherever and however you want them. So
in the combination of every other
every
classes.
other classes, yes. So here I've used Tailwind. If you guys haven't used Tailwind, you would say just open Tailwind and search for, if you want to change the color, you could just search for color here, setting text decoration, setting maybe text color, and pick up any of the class from here and try to use it. So let's okay, I'll walk you through the code as well. So in the previous example, we talked about separating container content. We apply those principles, but we are not very explicit while doing it. So we keep those things in mind while creating our HTML, but we don't create classes for it. We don't name them in any ways. We just start with creating our HTML and then give whatever classes are required. So I have given height 300 directly to this element. I've given height 100, width 100% directly on the image. We had a class which defined what flex. So if you go back to the code, we just have one property in the class, but it has some meaning. It has some semantic to it. But here we are not doing that. If we want to apply flex, we're just mentioning flex here, and that will apply display flex to it. In the previous example, we had a title container class which gave this styles basis 50 flex basis 50% and padding of certain number 10 pixel. But here we are directly mentioning that on the HTML div and so on and so forth. We are not explicitly creating any classes, semantic classes for it. We are directly using presentational atomic utility classes, which are coming out of Tailwind and styling our HTML. And this is also achieving the same result that we saw, but this is a completely different approach. So this fixes specificity. There is no specificity. You have one class doing one thing and you use that. You will find if you are writing your CSS using atomic yourself and not using any library, initially you would find yourself writing a lot of classes, but as time passes and you add a lot of pages, you would find yourself reusing a lot of them. So there is very high reuse because you have one class doing only one thing. So your CSS code base is clean. So, but the side effect of that is you see a lot of classes that are getting applied on the HTML.
Yeah.
Your structure is not reusable. So what we saw in OOCSS and BEM, so you had structures that were getting reusable. So in case you had to put a footer item, you knew which classes to look at. You could just do a global search in your project to locate that class and copy that structure. Here you cannot do that. Here there's no concept of identifying repeating patterns. You just use the atomic classes and start styling your elements the way you want. You would still want to practice the you would still want to follow the OOCSS practices where you are separating container from content and structure from skin and so on. But you don't create classes for that. So, any opinions on this? How do you find this approach? Would you use this in your project, or any advantages of using this, or any use cases that you think you could use this approach?
So one of the advantages that I feel after using this ready-made classes from libraries like Tailwind is the speed that we get to create a front end from scratch. It's very speedy. We don't have to write any custom CSS and all those things. So it's definitely improves speed.
Maybe prototyping a simple design, right?
Yes. And also I find the class names or whatever they have, ready-made class names are very intuitive.
Yeah.
So after reading this, we know what this class is doing and everything.
Correct.
So another thing here is if you go back few years ago, say 10 years ago, where we were heavily using Bootstrap and even maybe Angular 1.x, we did not have frameworks like React, and component-driven architectures were not followed up to that extent. Our components used to sit in HTML and CSS files itself. So if you have a look at Bootstrap 3 or libraries of that time, you would find JS to be used just to merely handle some events or do some DOM manipulation, and the actual component code or your UI code was very HTML and CSS heavy. So with that, I mean, under that scenario, creating semantic structures made sense. But in the current times, our components are in our JS. I mean, we are creating Angular components, we are creating React components. So abstraction of the component or modularization is happening in our JS files itself. And we never look at our HTML or there's no HTML. We never look at our CSS code base to find how look for the styling. So if we want to look at a component, we look at our JS file instead of a CSS file. So in the first look, this might look like an overkill, or this might not look a very nice way of styling elements. But if you look at from the point of view of a React component or code base in which your components are located in your JS, so these styles are not actually getting. You know where your components are. You know where to look for the styles of the component, which is in the component itself, and you are able to look at it in the first view itself. So if we have a look at this div, so this is
this would be in a separate component as well, right?
Yeah,
in a separate file.
This could be in a separate.
Yeah.
The string you're talking about?
No. This component. So this
will be in a separate file. This need not be like a large HTML.
Correct.
And this is a separator basically. If we have a separator component, and if we go in the file, and if we find this div, then it will make more sense there. The semantic meaning is given by the component name as separator, and then how the separator looks like is defined by these classes. So a separator will have a border, black border, and it will have some margins. You can directly look at the style in the component itself.
Yeah, not going to get to go through the SCSS.
SCSS, yeah. You don't need to go to SCSS, CSS file to know the styles of the component. So these are the few advantages. So, but if you are working on some older projects where you have HTML structure like this, you would be, currently I'm working on Ruby-based project where we have slim files, which are long files, and I can't imagine if we have these long classes there, it will be very difficult to identify, understand what's happening there.
Yeah.
So with React, you can use this. It depends, and as your code base grows, if you find repeating structures, repeating class names in your components as well, you could use SCSS just to abstract that into a similar into a semantic class. If all the components have a body in them, say card body as a sub component like a card body which has margin of say 10 pixels, you could abstract that out, style out into a common class name body, and use SAS to extend it to have common styling, and use that abstracted class in every place where you need a body. So you could do that. Anything else anyone wants to share? Any opinions on this from anyone? And how easy was it to make the changes? Did anyone try to make these changes?
Or we can also try here.
Okay, let's
Maybe.
try.
Yeah.
So change the arrow. Okay, we have to do it to view more. So let's just change this view more, and okay, we want, we want this to look like a button.
Yeah.
So let's give this padding 10, PG blue, and text. Let's reduce the padding a bit. Okay. I'll just quickly Google for border radius.
Rounded.
Just copy this. Paste it. And the button is ready. Yeah. This is, and it is this easy to do this. You don't have to think about what you want to name the class, where you want to place it. Just go to the element that you want to style and add the styles. Okay. What I want to do is to
set the font size of the information
to it large. So just come to the, let me try to give that here first. That works. LG.
Font LG. Sorry, text LG.
Text LG. And it has increased the font. So here I did not have to think about creating a class. I just used an atomic class. So if at all, I mean, so this is, I'm reusing it from Tailwind, but if I was to follow an atomic structure and create my own CSS, I would just, I'll just say text 20 pixel and font size 20 pixel. And come here and use that 20, right? Text 20 pixels. Yes, so you don't have to think about what, so name is what it does. So in atomic CSS, every class will only have one property, and that property would be the name of the class, similar to the name of the class. So one obvious bad practice is doing this. So naming it text 20 and adding 20 pixel. So
yeah.
And the last one was change the font size of the footer to 14 pixels. So I will just create another class here. Limit 14, go to the footer items. Text 14px. Did you change it?
I think the size is still 20px.
Yeah. Sorry, copy pasting is not a good habit to have. Yes. So while following atomic methodology, you follow a presentational approach. You create the class based on how it should look, what it applies, I mean, based on the implementation that it has, and then use it wherever you want to.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this? Would you use this in your next project? We are using, I mean, the project that I'm working on, we are using this approach heavily. And this is helping us to move things faster. We are not having discussions around this class thing is not correct. You could name this instead.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that is not happening in our code reviews. We do talk about structuring the React component as a whole. We do have discussions around separating structures, and I mean, if we need to create a separate component for a certain element or a certain element group, but we don't find ourselves talking about CSS and styling at all. Cool. So if there is nothing else anyone wants to share, we have a quiz to end our discussion. So the first question is, which methodology will you use to build a simple website or simple CMS library? If you're using CMS and you want to just design pages, which of the methodologies would you guys use?
We just now, just to revise whatever we discussed, we just now discussed about OOCSS, SMACSS CSS, Atomic CSS, and I think it was BEM. Yeah.
There's no wrong answer actually. Yeah, all of the approaches could be used, but
Yeah.
which one will you use?
Sir, BEM.
BEM.
I would prefer. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any specific reason to choose it? Maybe compared to Atomic, maybe.
Atomic, like for this simple website, we need to create multiple CSS classes, and that will make the CSS file a huge file. But since it is a simple website, so preferably we can club all those CSS to make one single class in the web format, so that it will be easy to use.
Right. Yeah.
Good point that you made about a lot of CSS would if you
be there
if we use Atomic.
Yeah, cool. Next question.
Which methodology will you use while consuming a library like Bootstrap or MUI? So this is a very common scenario where we start a project and we import one of the common library. So in this scenario, you have a lot of ready-made components, and major chunk of your styling is taken care by these libraries, but you do have smaller use case related or design related things that you have to do. So in this use case, which methodology would you prefer?
Like these type of libraries usually give the classes, so Atomic will be preferred here. And if on top of that, if we have some some custom designs to be implemented, then like BEM or OO, like object-oriented thing can be implemented.
Yeah.
Cool. So you're saying if you have to create a component which is not part of this, so for that component you would use BEM. But for smaller set, you would have Atomic classes.
Yes.
Anyone else has any different opinion or anything to share?
Yeah.
Probably a combination of BEM and SMACSS. The SMACSS mainly for structuring of the layouts that we have to easily identify the containers of all these components. And BEM mainly for easily identifying which part of that particular component we are trying to modify. Because I think most of the libraries already follow the BEM. So if we just go ahead with that and use the same thing, it would be easier to identify as well.
Cool. So just one thing here is SMACSS. So rather than using SMACSS, most of the libraries actually expose variables, I mean design tokens related to their design. So instead of using SMACSS to define base rules, you could just, I mean, you could have those customization defined in your base rules. Instead of writing CSS, you could just, your base rules will have those tokens defined. Instead of having the CSS classes, you would just have your theme tokens, theme part of SMACSS could be used here. Cool.
Yeah. Got it.
So if you, which methodologies will you use to build your own component library? Consider you have a task of building a bootstrap or MUI from scratch.
Yeah.
Which methodology would you prefer?
Again, BEM, because for the end users, it would be easier to have their custom CSS implemented at specific elements of the library.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Like I'll be using the combination of SMACSS and atomic BEM, like whichever possible, to like, since it is a library, so the user must be like independent of like choosing any of those things.
Yeah. Exporting the tokens would be a great idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I have a similar thought on this. So you could use a combination of SMACSS and BEM and even atomic to export certain utility classes, because while using Bootstrap as well, Bootstrap themselves export a lot of atomic utility classes which could be used.
Yeah.
So a combination of multiple methodologies would definitely help you. Cool. With this, we are done with our session. Any thoughts on this? Any feedback that you want to share instantly to us? Or
yeah, we will be sharing, circulating the link also.
One question I have is like, how will you suggest, like, when we are going with the theming thing, like dark mode or light mode or any custom theme? So how will you suggest to implement those type of stylings?
So like theming tokens, right?
Yeah, miss theming token, miss tokenizing all those variables, or miss how will you prefer one should go forward when they have to implement a theme based design?
Yeah, we have used theme-based design in our project as well. So we have specific. So mostly in our case we have MUI, right? So MUI also gives you that tokens and everything that you can set. And if you want to use your own CSS or your own custom CSS, again the same thing. You have your tokens into a variable, and then you can just modify them on the fly, and the CSS will change according to the theme. And of course, always maintain the variables here. Never use magic numbers or magic strings, like for fonts, maybe, you know. So that can be another thing that you should be looking at.
Yes. And if you want to go with a very CSS specific approach where you're not going to use any of the JS and you want to change the style runtime, you could use specificity here. You could add a theme name to the body or the topmost element of your HTML, and then have classes with that specificity, so theme name and then classes that you want to override based on the theme.
Based on the theme, yeah.
And that would come in your theme. You should have separate folder structure,
Fine.
structure per theme, so that they are
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anything else? Anyone? Till then, please go to the link that Joshua has shared in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback.